Hey guys, today I'm going to be reading stories from the Reddit thread called What's the Creepiest Unsolved Mystery? If you guys enjoy these stories, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you. There was a man named Teteke Kansi who was in the hospital for abdominal surgery, so he could barely move. One day a nurse came in to change the linens, and when she came back inside from being right outside his room, he had disappeared. He wasn't anywhere in the room. The hospital searched for a week until some men had to perform maintenance on the ceiling. When they opened the ceiling up, they found Teteke inside the ceiling in the fetal position and he was deceased. The autopsy showed that his death wasn't of natural causes, and someone put him in the ceiling. A few months later, a man named Sendil Sabaya was admitted to a different hospital to have his broken femur treated. After a few days there, he was about to be transferred to a different hospital to see an orthopedist, but when they went to get him, he was gone. They looked for him and only found him when a bad smell permeated the hospital. So the staff opened up the ceiling and found Sandil dead in the exact same position as Teteke, and they said Sandil also didn't die a natural death and was placed in the ceiling by something. I think that's creepy. Larry Bader. Not necessarily creepy, but bizarre for sure. Larry Bader was married with 3 kids. In March 1957, he went fishing on Lake Erie by himself, even though he knew a storm was coming. The next day, they found his crashed boat, but Larry himself was nowhere to be seen. Almost 10 years later, in 1965, he was found by his niece doing an archery demonstration in Nebraska when he was originally from Ohio. When confronted, he swore he didn't know anyone named Larry Bader, as he identified as Fritz Johnson. He claimed to have lived in Nebraska all his life, having memories as a child named Fritz. He also got married and had another kid. His niece, convinced Fritz was her uncle, requested that he goes to the police and have his fingerprints analyzed. He was, in fact, Larry Bader, but he had no recollection whatsoever of his previous life. On Thursday, December 12th, 1985, a toddler was spotted wandering unaccompanied around a Kmart department store in Spanaway, Washington, with no parent or guardian in sight. When authorities tried to coax information out of her to help locate her parents, the only piece of information she was able to give was, "Mommy's in the trees." A photo was placed in the local newspaper, and the toddler was soon recognized as Crystal by her maternal grandmother, Louise Conrad, who took her into her care, later saying that Crystal appeared shaken and disturbed, perhaps by something she had seen. So, where was Mommy? About 2 months later, the body of Diana Robertson, Crystal's mommy, was discovered deep in the forest around Elbay, Washington, with 17 stab wounds and a tube sock tied around her neck. Nearby, an abandoned 1982 Plymouth pickup truck was discovered covered in bloodstains and with a handwritten note on the dashboard simply saying, "I love you, Diana." This truck belonged to her partner, Mike Reamer, an outdoorsman and trapper who often spent time in these woods. Mike, however, was nowhere to be found. Initially, the police believed him to be responsible for Diana's murder. Just 2 months prior, on October 19th, 1985, Mike had been arrested and cited for domestic assault and malicious damage after allegedly kicking in a door at her apartment, throwing her to the floor, and rubbing her face in the carpet. They also connected her murder to a double murder that had occurred in the same woods 4 months earlier. A man named Stephen Harkins was found shot to death in his sleeping bag, while his companion, Ruth Copper, was found strangled 2 months later. Both had a tube sock tied around their neck. So, was Mike a serial killer? He had apparently been in the woods at the very time that Harkins and Cooper were murdered, and certainly knew how to navigate the tricky terrain. But with no trace of him, there was no way to tell for certain. Over 20 years later, on March 26, 2011, a hiker discovered a partial human skull in the woods off of State Route 7 in Lewis County near Mineral, Washington, about a mile from where Diana's body had been found. Subsequent analysis revealed that it was indeed Mike, and that he was likely a homicide victim himself. So 4 murders in the same woods by an unknown assailant. The question remains, how did Crystal find herself wandering around the Kmart over 30 miles away? She must have been driven there and dropped off, presumably by the serial killer. Crystal must have spent a silent 45-minute drive in the car with the very person who killed her parents, with no memory of the event. Kyron Horman. Stepmom took him to school, walked around the science fair, and the gym, then he went to class. Has not been seen since. He was in the school. Come on now. It's been over a decade now. I have a Google alert on his name for updates. Fruka Liebs was last seen leaving a bar to go home. Then at some point during her walk home, she went missing. She was able to make several texts and calls to loved ones over the next few days, but was very vague and refused to give information on her whereabouts. The details of her last phone call to her sister are pretty chilling. From Wikipedia. During this conversation, she is said to have answered the question of whether she was being held captive with a faint yes, immediately followed by a loud no. Contact broke off after this phone call. Her body was found several months later in a wooded area, most likely dumped from somewhere else. No further details were found out about the killer, motive for her death, or her disappearance. Alonzo Brooks. Not necessarily creepy in the traditional sense, though it has a long history and is literally close to home. The reboot of Unsolved Mysteries featured an episode about his disappearance. Because of it, after his death initially being ruled undetermined, he was exhumed and changed cause of death to murder, which was always pretty obvious. He went to a party in a small Kansas town, Lacine, with a few friends. Alonzo had some words with the partygoers. His friends bailed. Alonzo doesn't come home. The next day, his shoes are found down the road, separately. Police search the area, including along a creek near the party house. Nothing. A few weeks later, the police let the family do a search, after not letting them be involved earlier. His body is almost immediately found along that same creek. Of note, though, is that his body didn't show any signs of deterioration or decomposition that would be expected of having been there for weeks. It's presumed he was in a fight at the party, dragged down the road, and possibly inadvertently killed in a shed near the party house that was torn down shortly after. The other fucked up part is that it suggested his body was kept in a meat locker and covered up by the cops, and when the family tried to get more involved in the search, his body was dumped along the creek, thereby explaining the lack of decomposition. The party had some 100 people there. Someone knows something, and no one is saying anything. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Shortly after midnight on May 14, 2008, Brandon Swanson drove his car into a ditch on his way home from celebrating the end of spring semester with fellow students from Minnesota West Community and Technical College's Canby campus. Uninjured, he got out and called his parents on his cell phone. Unsure of his exact location, he told them he believed he was near Lind, and they drove out to pick him up. However, they were unable to locate him. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes into the call, Brandon suddenly interrupted himself on the phone and said, "Oh shit." He was silent for the remainder of the call until his parents hung up and made multiple attempts to call him back. Brandon has not been seen or heard from since. Adam Richard Johnson from Minneapolis. In 2021, he was murdered, dismembered, and dumped in very public places over the course of a couple weeks. His head was left on a park bench and found by a random person jogging by. There hasn't been a single update since October 2021. I believe that despite this brutal, terrifying murder and blatant disregard for his corpse being discovered, the police aren't giving it the attention it deserves because of his previous issues with addiction and mental health. Adam was a father of two who tried his best. No one is perfect. Every murder should be given a proper investigation. We have one in Ireland that always creeps me out. A young guy, 22 years old, vanishes one night after a work Christmas party. He's seen a few times on CCTV, heading back to his place of work to get an umbrella. It was a stormy night in Dublin, and a taxi strike had people taking a walk home. This guy worked in a bank, but not in the money part. He stopped by his office and is seen talking to an unidentified person on the CCTV. This person is hovering around, almost waiting for him to return. He also doesn't mention anything to his colleagues inside. There's also a theory about a girl from Alaska he'd met. There are a lot of theories, but this case comes up every year as his family still searches for answers. There's also no trace of his phone, potentially as the streets had been cleared due to a presidential visit by the President of the USA. The CCTV images of this case give me the chills. Have a read and a watch.